At 2:18 in the morning, the iron gates of the Calabrese mansion screamed as they swung inward. The sound cut through the November silence like a blade wrapped in ice. Mia Morales stumbled through those gates, and everything about her screamed devastation. 27 years old, but life had aged her by decades. Dark hair plastered to her pale face with sweat and blood, her blue caretaker's uniform torn open across the ribs, exposing a gash that still bled. She crashed through the mansion's front door, leaving bloody handprints on the polished brass handle, and collapsed onto the cold white marble foyer floor. The crash echoed through the house like a gunshot in the silence. Above, on the curved staircase, Nicholas Calabrese descended step by step in a black tailored suit. 6'3", muscular, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes the color of a gathering storm. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder of the man he used to be. Gold watch on his wrist. Silver rings on his fingers. Every movement controlled, deliberate, the walk of a man who had spent 15 years making people move out of his way. Behind him, Tony and Nino, his closest lieutenants, both in dark suits that cost more than most people earned in a year. Their hands moved instinctively toward their weapons. But then they stopped. Because Mia Morales, gasping for breath on the marble floor, was clutching something in her trembling hand. A pair of white baby shoes. Worn. Faded. Small enough to fit in a child's palm. Nicholas froze mid-step. The color drained from his face. Those shoes. His voice came out as barely a whisper, and in 15 years, Tony and Nino had never heard their boss speak like this. Where did you get those? Mia's eyes fluttered open. She couldn't focus. Her ribs screamed with pain. But she gasped out the only words that mattered to her in that moment. Emma. Please. Find Emma. She's at the shelter. Room 12. Please. They hurt her. They were going to hurt her again. Mia's breathing came shallow and rapid. Blood pooled around her on the marble. From her torn pocket, $34 in crumpled bills scattered across the white stone floor. Every dollar she had left in the world. The money that was supposed to keep her from eviction in 2 weeks. The money that meant survival. Nicholas moved like lightning. He crossed the foyer in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside her, his expensive suit touching her blood without hesitation. Emma is at the shelter. His voice was different now. Dangerous in a way his men had never heard before. You know Emma. Mia's hand opened. Those shoes. Her fingers were shaking so badly she could barely hold them. I've been caring for her, she whispered. For 3 months. I protect her. I keep her safe. But Douglas Hale, he found out. He came to the shelter tonight. He said if I didn't give him the money he keeps stealing from my tips, he would take her. He said he would sell her, and I couldn't stop him, I couldn't stop him. She couldn't finish. Pain overwhelmed her. Nicholas caught her as she began to collapse. Tony was already on his phone. Within seconds, the mansion erupted into motion. Black SUVs rumbled to life in the driveway outside. Doors slammed. Men appeared from everywhere, moving with the precision of a military operation. But Nicholas didn't move. He stayed kneeling beside Mia, holding those baby shoes, staring at them like they were the only real thing in the world. Those shoes belonged to Emma. His Emma. The daughter the state had taken from him 4 years ago when his abusive father's legacy still clung to him like a curse. The daughter he thought he would never see again. The daughter he had kept those shoes for, the only physical proof that she had ever existed at all. And this woman, this broken woman bleeding on his marble floor, had been protecting her. Nino appeared beside them. Boss, the hospital is 8 minutes away. We're moving her now. But Nicholas didn't let her go. He looked down at the $34 scattered on the floor, then at the gash across her ribs, then at the way she was trembling like a candle in the wind. What's your name? He asked. Mia, she whispered. Mia Morales. Mia, he repeated, and something in his chest shifted. Something cold and dangerous and protective all at once. "You're not going to die. Do you understand? I am not going to let you die." Tony carried her to the waiting black SUV, and Nicholas climbed in beside her, still holding those shoes, still holding her hand. The vehicle shot forward into the night, and in the mansion behind them, men were already moving. Phones were ringing. Names were being spoken. Questions were being asked. Douglas Hale. Deanna Whitfield. These names would be remembered. But Mia Morales didn't know any of that yet. She didn't know that she had just crashed into the life of the most dangerous man in Las Vegas. She didn't know that her small act of protection, keeping a forgotten child safe in a city shelter, had just started something that would tear apart two people who had spent years preying on the invisible. She didn't know that the shoes in the hands of the man holding hers were the key to everything. Now let us go back. Back to 3 days earlier. Back to when Mia Morales was still counting pennies and praying for miracles that never came. The alarm on Mia's phone chimed at 5:43 in the morning. She didn't need the alarm. She was already awake. She had been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of the studio apartment that was barely big enough to contain her narrow bed, a used desk, and the single shelf of books she had collected before money became impossible. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a bird. She stared at that bird every morning before the sun came up. Mia pulled herself out of bed, her body aching in ways that shouldn't happen to a 27-year-old woman. But then again, most 27-year-old women weren't working double shifts at the Riverside City Shelter and picking up evening catering gigs at hotels where rich people threw parties and left her with nothing but loose change and insults. She walked to her kitchen. It was 5 paces from her bed. She opened her wallet and removed the bills. $17.42. That was everything. She needed to make it last for more days until her next paycheck, which, if Douglas Hale didn't steal her tips again, would be somewhere around $85. $85. Out of which she paid rent, electricity, food, phone. Her hands were shaking as she counted the money again. $17.42. In 4 days. For food and everything else. She made black coffee with no sugar and ate yesterday's stale bread. The bread was hard enough that it hurt her teeth, but it filled her stomach. She dressed in her blue caretaker's uniform, the one with the rip under the left arm that she had sewn together 4 times. The fabric was thin enough now that you could almost see through it. By 6:30, she was walking toward the Riverside City Shelter. The city was still mostly asleep. The November wind cut through the empty streets, and she had no coat. She had sold her coat last winter to buy medicine for a child at the shelter named Marcus. He had pneumonia. His mother never visited. The shelter was an old converted hotel downtown, the kind of place where the city warehoused the unwanted. Children without homes. Families who had fallen through every crack society offered. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly, and the smell of industrial cleaner mixed with something darker, desperation, maybe. Or resignation. Mia's supervisor, Patricia, was already at the front desk. She looked up when Mia arrived and said nothing. Patricia never said hello. She barely said anything at all, which was better than Douglas Hale, who said everything with his eyes. Douglas Hale was the hotel manager. 58 years old, with thinning hair that he combed over his scalp in a way that fooled no one. He wore cheap suits with coffee stains on the sleeves, and he had a way of watching people that made them want to disappear. His office was on the 2nd floor, and every tip the staff collected went into a jar on his desk. At the end of the week, he distributed what he decided each person deserved. Last week, Mia had collected $43 in tips. She had received 8. The shelter was already awake by the time Mia started her shift. The children were in the cafeteria, eating eggs that came from a bulk distributor and toast that had been kept warm under heat lamps since 5 in the morning. The children ate anyway. They were hungry. There were 14 children in Mia's section, and she moved through them all morning, checking on wounds, helping them with breakfast, braiding hair, reading stories that made them forget for a few minutes that their mothers had abandoned them, or their fathers were in prison, or their houses had burned down, or they had simply been too poor to keep. But there was one child that Mia loved more than the others, though she knew she wasn't supposed to have favorites. Emma. Emma was 5 years old, with dark hair that curled at her shoulders and eyes the color of rain clouds. She had been at the shelter for 3 months. Her mother had dropped her off one morning and never returned. There was no father listed on her file. There was barely any information at all. Just a name. Emma. And a date of birth. Emma sat beside Mia every morning during breakfast and would not let go of Mia's hand. She would hold it while Mia tried to eat. While Mia tried to work. The grip was tight, like if she didn't hold on, Mia might disappear too. "Good morning, baby," Mia said, sitting down beside her. Emma's eyes lit up. She launched herself at Mia's chest and wrapped her arms around Mia's neck. "You came back," Emma whispered. "You didn't leave like everyone leaves." Mia held her. The girl was so small. So fragile. Mia could feel every vertebra in her spine through the thin yellow shirt the shelter provided. "I always come back," Mia said. Always. At 10 in the morning, Douglas Hale appeared in the doorway of the cafeteria. He leaned against the frame with his coffee in one hand, watching. His eyes landed on Mia, and something cold moved across his face. He walked toward her. The room seemed to get quieter. "Morales," he said. His voice was quiet, which was worse than if he had shouted. "Come with me." Mia stood. She gently removed Emma's hand from her sleeve, and Emma's face crumpled like paper. "Where are you going?" "I'll be right back," Mia said, though she didn't know if that was true. Douglas's office was small and smelled like cologne mixed with cigarette smoke. He closed the door behind her. There was no window. Just his desk, covered with papers and the tip jar, and Mia. "You've been talking to the other staff about tips," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Mia said. "I haven't." "Don't lie to me." He stepped closer. "I know you told Patricia what you collected last week. $43. And then I gave you 8. Mia's heart was beating so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "I was confused," she said carefully. "I might have mentioned your trouble," he said. "I can see that. You think you're better than this job. You think you're better than the rest of us. But you're not. You're nothing. You know what nobody wants? A woman who works in a shelter. Nobody wants you. Nobody would miss you." He leaned against his desk, blocking her path to the door. "There's a private party at the Diamond Plaza Hotel tomorrow night. High-end guests. They need catering staff. I put your name in. You'll work the event. And every dollar you make in tips, you'll bring to me. All of it. Because that's what happens here. You work for me. You give me what I decide you owe me. Do you understand?" Mia nodded because she had learned long ago that nodding was safer than disagreeing. "Good," he said. "Now get back to the children." She walked back to the cafeteria, and Emma was waiting by the door, her small face streaked with tears that she had cried silently. "You came back," Emma whispered again, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "I came back," Mia confirmed, and held her until the trembling stopped. That night, after her shift, Mia walked home through the dark streets. The city glittered above her, casinos and hotels with lights that could be seen from space. Money. So much money, flowing through Las Vegas like a river. And she was invisible in the dark below, counting $17, trying to survive for more days. She didn't know that in less than 72 hours, everything would change. She didn't know that in a mansion across the city, a man was waking from a nightmare about a child he had lost. She didn't know that the shoes in her pocket, Emma's tiny first shoes that she had taken from the shelter storage room as a keepsake, would be the thread that connected her to the most dangerous man in Las Vegas. All she knew was that her head hurt. Her ribs ached from the weight of carrying children all day. And Emma was waiting for her tomorrow morning, counting on her to come back. So Mia Morales lay in her bed and stared at the water stain shaped like a bird on her ceiling, and she prayed for a miracle that she had stopped believing in long ago. The morning light filtered through the gaps in the curtains, grey and thin, like light that could barely afford to exist. Mia Morales was already awake, though the clock beside her bed read 5:43 in the morning. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours. Her stomach hurt. Not the sharp pain of hunger anymore, she'd gotten used to that 3 weeks ago, but the deeper ache of knowing that her body was beginning to consume itself. She sat up slowly in the narrow bed, careful not to shift her weight too quickly. The studio apartment was so cold she could see her breath. She pulled the donated blanket around her shoulders and counted the cash on the nightstand again, even though she had already counted it 4 times the night before. $17.63. That had to last until Friday when the elderly care home paid her for the week. It was only Monday. Her shift at St. Catherine's elderly care home started at 6 in the morning. 40 minutes to shower in water that would never get warm, to dress in the white uniform that hung loose on her frame, to walk the 3 blocks through the pre-dawn darkness to a place where she would feed people who didn't recognize her and pretend to smile while her own body begged for rest. The shower lasted for minutes because hot water was a luxury. The bathroom mirror showed her a face that didn't quite belong to her anymore. Mia Morales was 27 years old, but the woman staring back looked a decade older. Her dark eyes had hollowed slightly at the cheekbones. Her brown hair, which used to fall in soft waves past her shoulders, was pulled back in a braid so tight it pulled at her scalp. She had done that on purpose. The tension helped her stay awake. By 5:58, she was walking through the dark streets of Las Vegas. The city had an eerie quality at this hour, as if all the brightness and noise had been a performance that ended at midnight and would not resume until evening. The casinos still glowed in the distance, but here, in the residential streets where ordinary people lived, everything was shuttered and still. Dead leaves skittered across the pavement in a cold October wind, moving like they were running from something. St. Catherine's elderly care home occupied a converted mansion, pale yellow with white trim, sitting behind a chain-link fence. Mia had worked here for 4 months. She let herself in through the staff entrance, her shoes making soft sounds on the linoleum floors. The smell hit her immediately, antiseptic and something underneath it, something sharp and broken, like the smell of endings. Mrs. Patterson was already awake in her room, sitting in her chair by the window, waiting for someone to bring her back to a morning that would never come. She had Alzheimer's, advanced stage. She had been a teacher once, 40 years ago. Now she was 84 and lived in a room with mint green walls and a plastic chart that tracked her medications. "Good morning," Mia said, keeping her voice soft like she was approaching a frightened animal. "I'm going to help you with breakfast, okay?" Mrs. Patterson looked at her with eyes that contained no recognition whatsoever. Then her face shifted, softened. "Oh, hello, daughter. I was wondering when you'd get here. I have so much to tell you. So much has happened." Mia's chest tightened, but she had learned not to correct her. Not to say, "I am not your daughter, I am Mia, the caregiver." Because Mrs. Patterson was happy in this moment, in this version of the morning where her lost daughter had come to visit. And happiness, real happiness, was rarer than money in this place. She helped Mrs. Patterson to the small table and brought the breakfast tray, oatmeal with raisins, a small glass of orange juice, wheat toast. Mrs. Patterson ate slowly, forgetting between bites whether she had already eaten, starting over each time. Mia waited beside her, watching, helping her lift the spoon when her hands shook too much. When Mrs. Patterson's attention drifted away from the food entirely, staring out the window at something only she could see, Mia did what she had started doing 2 weeks ago. She sat down in the chair beside her and ate the remaining oatmeal directly from the tray. The spoon was warm. The oatmeal was lukewarm, slightly congealed, but it tasted like salvation. "You're getting thin," Mrs. Patterson said suddenly, her eyes focusing on Mia's face with surprising clarity. For just a moment, the fog lifted. "My daughter got thin like that once. Right before she left for California. Has something bad happened to you? The question was so direct, so unexpectedly kind, that Mia almost broke. Instead, she smiled and said, "No, Mrs. Patterson. Everything is fine. I'm just working hard." Mrs. Patterson reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were small and papery, like a bird's foot. "Working hard isn't the same as being happy. My daughter forgot that. I hope you don't." Then the moment passed. Mrs. Patterson's eyes clouded again. She looked down at her empty bowl as if she couldn't remember eating. "When is breakfast?" she asked. Mia's shift at St. Catherine's ended at 2 in the afternoon. She had 8 minutes to walk to the Grand View Hotel, where she was scheduled to work a shift in the housekeeping department, 5 hours of changing sheets, cleaning toilets, folding towels. Her supervisor at the care home, a tired woman named Rita with gray hair and permanent dark circles, caught her at the staff exit. "Mia, wait a second." Rita handed her a small container. "There's leftover soup in the break room from lunch. I'm going to throw it away in about an hour. If you want to take it before then, go grab it." Mia took the container and felt a rush of gratitude so intense it made her dizzy. "Thank you," she said. "You look thin," Rita said quietly, the way people do when they're stating a fact they wish wasn't true. "You eating?" "I'm fine," Mia said automatically. The lie came so easily now. She had said it so many times that it had become her default answer, the thing she said when the truth was too heavy to speak aloud. She grabbed the soup before her shift at the Grand View, eating it cold in the employee bathroom with her spoon because she didn't have 5 minutes to heat it up. The container held maybe 2 cups of lentil soup. She drank it slowly, trying to make it last, to let it sit in her stomach and convince her body that it had been fed enough. The Grand View Hotel existed in a different universe from St. Catherine's. Everything here was designed to make money, to draw it in, to convince people that their lives would be better if they spent it here. The lobby gleamed with polished marble. The casinos rang with manufactured excitement. The guest rooms were designed to make people forget that the outside world existed. Mia's job was to clean those rooms after people left them. She moved through the corridors with her cart, stripping beds, wiping down surfaces, replacing towels. Room for 12, abandoned by a businessman who had left his credit card receipts on the nightstand, $8,000 in gambling losses. Room 507, where someone had vomited in the bathroom and left it for her to clean. Room 614, where everything was pristine except for a used condom on the floor beside the bed. She worked with her head down, moving like a ghost, trying to be invisible. It was easier that way. At 4:15, Douglas Hale appeared in the hallway. He was the manager of the housekeeping department, a man in his late 40s with dark hair slicked back with product that made it shine like an oil slick. His smile never reached his eyes. He was carrying a room service tray with an empty bottle of wine and scattered bills, cash that guests left as tips for the workers. "Mia," he said, his voice smooth like something dangerous. "Let's talk about your performance." She straightened immediately, her heart rate spiking. "Yes, sir. You've been here 5 weeks now. And I've noticed something." He held up the tray. "The tips have been getting smaller. People aren't as satisfied with your work. That concerns me." "I'm sorry," she said, because apologizing was also automatic now. "I'll work harder." "I know you will," he said. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the cash from the room service tray. "For bills." She counted them mentally, maybe $35. "Because here's how this is going to work. Every dollar you make in tips, you're going to bring to me. All of it. Because those tips come from work you do in a hotel I manage, on my schedule, with my supplies. So they're mine first. Do you understand?" Mia felt something crack inside her chest, but she nodded. She had learned that nodding was safer than disagreeing. "Good," he said. "And Mia? If you mention this arrangement to anyone, to Rita, to management, to anyone, you'll never work in Las Vegas again. I have friends. I have reach. And I will make sure you're done. Understood?" Understood, she whispered. By 8 in the evening, she was walking through the dark towards City Children's Shelter, a converted house in a neighborhood that reminded her of her own: crumbling paint, chain-link fences, the permanent smell of poverty and endurance. The wind had picked up, carrying the first real cold of the season, and her thin jacket was not enough. The shelter was quiet at this hour. The children had been bathed and dressed for bed, though sleep was still hours away for many of them. Mia signed in and immediately found Emma, age 6, with curly dark hair and eyes that carried a sorrow no child should possess. Emma was sitting on her bed, a thin mattress covered with a donated blanket, waiting. She always waited. She waited for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, for bedtime, for morning. She waited for someone to come get her, for her mother to return, for everything to go back to before. "You came back," Emma whispered, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "I always come back," Mia said, and sat down beside her on the bed. Emma had arrived at the shelter 4 months ago with nothing. No suitcase, no clothes beyond what she was wearing, no stuffed animals, no photographs. She had arrived with bruises that were already starting to yellow, and a story she wouldn't tell, and a fear of loud voices that made her flinch at normal conversation. The only thing she had brought was a pair of soft pink shoes, tiny, meant for a baby who was just learning to walk. Emma had clung to those shoes like they were her only proof that she had once belonged to someone. Mia had kept them in her locker. Not as a violation of protocol, but as a preservation of the only thing that mattered, the fact that Emma had once been loved, once been held by someone who bought her shoes in a size she would grow into. "When I grow up," Emma said carefully, working through words she had clearly practiced, "will you still be here?" Mia braided her hair while she answered, her fingers moving through the dark curls with a gentleness she couldn't afford to show herself. "As long as I possibly can be." It wasn't a promise she could keep, and that was the real tragedy. Emma didn't understand the mathematics of survival yet. She didn't know that Mia was running out of time, that the debt sitting on her apartment was growing, that miracles were not real, that sometimes people who love you have to leave anyway because the world simply doesn't give them a choice. By 11:45 at night, Mia was walking home through the dead streets again. The wind had died down, leaving only a bitter cold that made her breath visible in the darkness. The studio apartment was exactly as she had left it, a single room with a folding table, a narrow bed, a lamp that flickered when you moved it wrong, and on the wall, the foreclosure notice. She had received it 2 months ago. It stated that the property was subject to foreclosure proceedings due to unpaid medical debt and property liens totaling $125,000. The debt that belonged to her mother, who had died of cancer 5 years ago. The debt that the hospital had placed squarely on Mia's shoulders, the living daughter who had no money and no way to pay. She had 2 weeks left. She sat at the folding table and pulled out the crumpled bills from her pockets, the one she had managed to keep from the care home, the one she had earned beyond what Douglas Hale had stolen. She counted $17.63. She had eaten most of the soup. Her stomach had stopped hurting long enough that she had almost forgotten what fullness felt like. She did the math in her head, the way she did every night. $125,000. 14 days. Even if she worked every single hour of every single day, even if she never slept, never ate, never allowed herself to stop moving, she would need 847 years to pay this debt. She laughed. It came out as a sound that wasn't quite laughing, wasn't quite crying. It was something in between, something that broke in the middle. Then she wrapped herself in the donated blanket and lay on the bed and stared at the water stain on the ceiling that was shaped like a bird in flight. She thought about Emma waiting for her tomorrow. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, who had asked if something bad had happened. She thought about Douglas Hale's voice, smooth and dangerous, telling her that she belonged to him now. And in the darkness of the studio apartment, with the October wind rattling the windows and her breath visible in the cold, Mia Morales wondered how much longer she could hold on. She didn't know that in less than 70 hours, everything would change. The October wind tore through the parking lot like a blade wrapped in ice. Mia Morales lay twisted on the asphalt, her caretaker's uniform torn open where Douglas Hale's boot had connected with her ribs. Warm blood spread across the cold ground. She couldn't breathe without pain splintering through her chest, each inhale a reminder that she had challenged a man who saw her as nothing but an obstacle to remove. She forced herself onto her hands and knees, the world tilting, vision swimming. The parking lot of the Starlight Hotel was empty at midnight. No witnesses. No help coming. Just the sound of Hale's car engine fading into the distance and the certainty that he had meant every word. Vanish, or I'll make sure you do. Mia's hands trembled as she pulled herself up using a parked sedan for balance. Every movement sent fire through her ribs. She could taste blood, iron sharp and thick on her tongue. But worse than the pain, worse than the fear for herself, was the image of Emma's small face, eyes squeezed shut against the hurt no 5-year-old should ever have to carry. She had seen the bruises 2 hours ago. Dark purple handprints across Emma's ribs, the kind of marks that belonged in a hospital report, in a police file, in the hands of someone with enough power to make sure they meant something. The kind of marks Mia recognized from her own childhood, when her father's hands had left the same terrible geography across her body. The shelter director had told her to file a complaint in the morning. The police dispatcher had said the same thing. No one was listening. No one cared about a girl with no parents and a foster sister with $34 in her pocket and no credibility left in this city. But Mia had found the security logs. Had seen Douglas Hale's name signed in as a volunteer mentor, a wolf wearing sheep's clothing, visiting Emma's room at least 12 times in the past month. Access that should have been impossible. Access that had been given to him by the people running the shelter, the same people who reported to Diana Whitfield's oversight board, the same board that could bury any complaint Mia filed before it even reached the desk of someone who might actually care. The parking lot tilted again. Mia steadied herself, forcing her breathing into shallow patterns that hurt less. She pulled her uniform closed, looked down at the trail of blood she had left across the concrete, and made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't go to the police. They already thought she was a thief. She couldn't go to the hospital. No insurance. No money. She couldn't stay silent. Emma was in danger right now, at the shelter, probably crying, probably waiting for Mia to come back like she always did, like she had promised she would. Mia thought of the file folder. Thought of the intake paperwork she had read when Emma first arrived at the shelter 3 months ago. Most of it had been redacted or removed, but she remembered one detail because it had seemed important at the time, a name and an address that signified loss and legal termination. Father, Nicholas Calabrese. Parental rights terminated 4 years ago. No contact. Last known residence, 1847, Sagebrush Canyon Road. She didn't know who he was. Didn't know that Nicholas Calabrese's name was spoken in whispers in certain circles, that men in expensive suits trembled when they saw his black SUVs appear on the street, that he controlled half the businesses in Las Vegas and all of the violence that ran underneath them like an underground river. Mia only knew that Emma had a father somewhere, and that father's address was listed, and she had nowhere else to turn. She walked to the bus station 3 blocks away, her side screaming with each step. The last bus of the night was heading toward the residential hills outside the city center. She had enough for a one-way ticket and nothing left after that. But she had something more valuable than money in her bag. She had Emma's first pair of shoes, the soft pink baby booties she had found in Emma's intake box, the only physical proof that Emma had ever belonged to anyone, that she had a father somewhere who might have loved her before the law said she wasn't allowed to love her anymore. The bus was nearly empty at 1:19 in the morning. Mia sat in the back row and pressed her hand against her ribs, feeling the wet warmth of blood soaking through the fabric beneath her clothes. The driver glanced at her in the mirror but didn't ask questions. In Las Vegas at that hour, you learned not to ask. The address led to a mansion set back from the main road, surrounded by a wrought iron fence that looked older than the city itself. Security cameras were positioned at every corner. The front gates were locked, but there was an intercom system, and Mia's hand shook as she pressed the button and waited for someone to answer. No one came. She pressed again, and this time, a man's voice emerged from the speaker, flat and suspicious. This is private property. Leave. I need to speak to Nicholas Calabrese. It's about Emma. Please. I'm bleeding and I need help. Silence stretched like a held breath. Then the gates began to open, slow and deliberate, like the jaws of something ancient and hungry deciding whether to swallow her whole. Mia walked through them at 2:18 in the morning, her caretaker's uniform torn, her blood dripping onto the marble driveway, her ribs on fire with every breath. The mansion loomed ahead, all dark stone and glowing windows, a fortress of wealth that made the shelter look like a cardboard box. The front door opened before she reached it. A man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-40s, wearing an open white shirt that revealed a chest scarred in ways that told their own terrible stories. Dark eyes met hers, eyes that were somehow both ice and fire at the same moment. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, white and distinct against olive skin. His hair was dark, silvered at the temples, slicked back in a style that belonged to a different era, to a different world than the one Mia came from. He took one step and stopped. His gaze moved from her face to her torn uniform, to the blood, to the small pink shoes clutched in her trembling hand. For a moment, the powerful man could not move. Could not speak. Could not do anything but stare at those shoes like they were a ghost given physical form, like they were proof of something he had spent for years believing was impossible. "Where did you get those?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath, but it shook with something that sounded almost like fear. "Emma. She's at the Riverside Children's Shelter. She's been hurt. I need help. I didn't know who else to." He moved before she finished speaking, one powerful arm wrapping around her waist as her legs gave out. The pain in her ribs was nothing compared to the shock of being held, of being caught before she fell, of having someone touch her with gentleness instead of violence. Two men emerged from the mansion behind him, younger, dressed in dark suits that cost more than the car Mia had ridden in for the last time 3 days ago. One had a scar across his jaw. The other had cold eyes that assessed threats for a living. "Tony. Nino. Call Dr. Reeves. Tell him we have a trauma case incoming," Nicholas said, his voice steady again, all command and certainty. "Then I need everything you can find on Douglas Hale and Diana Whitfield. Everything. Bank accounts, property records, surveillance footage, connections to the Riverside Shelter. I want to know every dirty secret either of them has ever kept." Tony and Nino exchanged a look. In 15 years of working for Nicholas Calabrese, they had never heard him sound like this. Never seen him carry anyone into the house with his own hands. Never heard urgency in his voice that wasn't about money or territory or power. "Yes, boss," Tony said, already dialing. Nicholas carried Mia through the foyer of marble floors that gleamed like ice, past furniture that probably cost more than everything she had owned in her entire life, and into a sitting room where a fire was already burning in an ancient fireplace. He laid her gently on a leather sofa and examined her injuries with the care of a man who had seen too much violence and learned exactly how to assess it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mia Morales. I work at the shelter. I've been taking care of Emma for the last 3 months. I didn't know she was yours. I just knew she needed help." Nicholas closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, something had broken inside him and then been carefully sealed back up, locked away where it wouldn't spill out and flood everything. "Tell me what happened." Mia told him about Douglas Hale and the planted cash and the false arrest. She told him about running back to the shelter and finding Emma's bruises. She told him about Hale's warning in the parking lot, the kick, the threat, the understanding that came with it, that she had no power, no protection, and no way to help the child she had come to love. As she spoke, a doctor arrived, moving with the efficiency of someone who had treated Mafia injuries for years. He cleaned Mia's wounds, applied antiseptic that burned like fire, and wrapped her ribs with gauze so tight she could barely breathe. The pain medication he administered moved through her bloodstream like a warm tide, pulling her under. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness took her was Nicholas Calabrese sitting in a leather chair beside the sofa, turning a pair of pink baby shoes over and over in his hands, his face carved from stone and his eyes glistening in the firelight. Tony watched from the doorway. Nino stood by the window, already on his phone, already hunting. In 15 years, neither of them had ever seen the boss cry. When Mia woke at dawn, pale sunlight was filtering through windows the size of doors, and Nicholas was still sitting in that same chair, like he had not moved all night. He was dressed differently now, in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but his eyes had not changed. They were still searching hers for something. "You saved my daughter when I couldn't," he said, his voice rough from the silence of the night. "You came here bleeding and alone because you had nowhere else to go. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are, Mia Morales." She tried to sit up and winced. Every muscle screamed. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. "I'm nobody. I have $34 and a criminal record and nothing to offer you." Nicholas leaned forward, and for a moment, the terrible power he carried seemed to radiate from him like heat from the fire. "You protected my child when I couldn't. You took a kick meant for her and stayed standing. That makes you not nobody. That makes you the only person in this city I trust with her life." He told her then about his own father, about growing up in violence and poverty, about clawing his way out and building an empire that let him control the danger instead of running from it. He told her about the day the state had come and taken Emma, about the baby shoes he had kept for 4 years, about the daily guilt that he had never stopped carrying. And Mia, in her own fractured way, told him about her father's hands, her mother's medical debt, the $125,000 she could never repay, the feeling of being trapped in a system designed to crush people like her into dust. "The debt doesn't matter," Nicholas said, and his voice was like a knife cutting through the tangle of her fear. "What matters is that you're safe now. What matters is that Emma is safe. And what matters is that the people who did this to you both are going to understand, very clearly, what that costs." He stood and walked to the window, and Mia saw the view then, the city spread below like a map of possibilities, all of it within his reach, all of it his to command. "Tony. Nino," he said into his phone. "Find them. I don't care where they run." The men on the other end of the line knew what that meant. They had found them before nightfall. The social worker's hand released Emma's grip at the mansion's threshold, and the little girl froze, her 5-year-old eyes scanning the marble foyer like she was entering a cathedral. She was thin, so thin her collarbones looked sharp enough to cut, and her dark hair fell in tangles past her shoulders. She wore a hand-me-down dress 2 sizes too large, cinched at the waist with a piece of string. Her sneakers had holes in the toes. "You can go find her," Nicholas said, and his voice was different now, softer, careful, like he was speaking to something made of glass. Emma's head turned toward the sound of him. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then her small body moved, and she ran, her feet slapping against the cold stone, calling out a name she had whispered 1,000 times in the dark shelter hallway where she slept. "Miss Mia." Mia stood in the sitting room, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. When Emma crashed into her legs, wrapping her small arms around Mia's thighs, something inside Mia's chest shattered and reformed all at once. She knelt down, pulling the child against her, and the tears came, tears she had thought she had exhausted months ago on a bus going nowhere, tears that belonged to a woman who had learned long ago not to cry. "Oh, baby, you're here," Mia whispered into Emma's matted hair. "You're safe. You're safe." Emma pulled back just enough to look up at her. "My head still hurts," she said, and the matter-of-factness of a child suffering cut through the room like a blade. Mia's hands trembled as she brushed Emma's hair away from her forehead. "Can you show me where it hurts, sweetheart? Show me." Emma hesitated, her small fingers working at the bottom of her dress. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her shirt. What Mia saw made her breath catch, purple bruises blooming across the child's ribs like flowers growing in poison. Yellow-green marks older and darker. Finger-shaped impressions on her small arms. Nicholas stood in the doorway, and the expression that crossed his face was something his men had never witnessed in 15 years of service. His jaw clenched. His hands formed fists, then opened, then formed fists again. For a moment, the terrible power he carried seemed to collapse inward, consuming him from the inside. He walked into the room and knelt down slowly, his expensive tailored suit creasing at the knees. His hand shook as he reached toward his daughter's bruised ribs, but he stopped, afraid that even his gentleness might cause her pain. "Baby," he whispered, and his voice broke, actually broke, like something inside him had fractured beyond repair. "Who did this to you?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Mia first, as if asking permission to speak truth into existence. Then she turned back to her father, her voice barely audible. "The man who came at night. He said if I told you, he'd make sure I never saw Miss Mia again. He said she'd disappear." Nicholas pulled Emma into his arms, cradling her carefully against his chest, and for the first time in his life, he allowed himself to break. No sound came, his body simply shook, his face buried in his daughter's hair, his hands shaking as they held her like she might evaporate if he loosened his grip even slightly. Tony and Nino stood near the doorway, both men's faces tight, their eyes looking away out of respect for something they had never seen before, their boss stripped down to the bone, the Mafia boss erased entirely, leaving only a father destroyed and remade in the same moment. "You're safe now," Nicholas whispered, and he said it again, and again, like a prayer repeated until it became real. "I promise you, baby. No one will ever hurt you again. No one." He looked at Mia over Emma's head, and she saw the transformation complete itself, the dangerous man she had seen in the foyer that first night transformed entirely into something else. Not weak. Never weak. But tender in a way that made her understand why men followed him into battle. 3 blocks away, in a high-rise apartment overlooking the city, Diana Whitfield's phone rang at 4 in the morning. She was already awake, dressed, a packed suitcase on her bed. She had been awake since midnight, refreshing news websites obsessively, watching the Mia Morales story spread across local channels like wildfire. Douglas Hale's voice came through the phone, and it was unraveling. "She's with him," Hale said. "The Morales girl. She's with Nicholas Calabrese." "Diana, do you know who he is?" Diana's blood went cold. She did know. Everyone in Las Vegas who paid attention knew. The name Calabrese was whispered in boardrooms and courtrooms and police precincts. It was a name that made federal agents straighten in their chairs. "We need to leave," she said flatly. "Right now. Pack everything. Meet me at the airport in 2 hours." "Where are we going?" "Anywhere but here," she said, and she hung up. Hale's apartment was 1 block from the airport. He shoved clothes into a suitcase with trembling hands, withdrew $80,000 in cash from his safe, money he had stolen in small increments from Mia's tips, from other employees, from the hotel itself. Money that suddenly felt like blood in his hands. He never made it to the car. At 5:17 in the morning, 12 men in black descended on his building like ghosts materializing from the fog. They moved with synchronized precision, tactical vests, federal badges catching the early light. The FBI. Nicholas had been feeding them information for 4 years, corruption, trafficking, money laundering, all of it carefully documented, all of it building toward a moment that had finally arrived. They breached his door at 5:20. The lock shattered. Hale, half-dressed and panicked, bolted from his bedroom toward the stairs. He made it 3 steps before hands grabbed him, pulled him down, his body striking the edge of each step as they dragged him lower. "Please, please, I didn't," he screamed, and his voice echoed through the stairwell like the cry of something already dying. "Douglas Hale," the agent said, her voice cold and absolute as she cuffed him. "You're under arrest for assault of a minor, child endangerment, theft, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." They dragged him into the pre-dawn light, his face contorted with terror, his body trembling like a wounded animal backed into a corner. News cameras were already there, someone had tipped them off, and his face filled 1,000 screens as he was thrown into the back of a black SUV. Diana Whitfield's arrest came 45 minutes later. The FBI came to her mansion with the same silent precision, and she was in her silk robe when they entered, her face still arranged in the expression of a woman who believed herself untouchable. Her foundation had distributed millions in charitable grants. She sat on state boards. She had lunch with judges. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she shrieked as they entered her bedroom, her voice shrill with disbelief. I'll have your badges. I'll have your jobs. I know the governor personally. Diana Whitfield, the agent said, and her voice was a knife. You're under arrest for embezzlement of $2,300,000 from the Riverside Children's Foundation, conspiracy, and financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent. They cuffed her in front of her floor-to-ceiling mirrors, in front of the paintings she had acquired with stolen money, in front of the view she had believed was hers forever. Then they walked her out in full daylight, her silk robe fluttering, her face twisted in rage and humiliation as news cameras captured every second of her descent. Her neighbors watched from their balconies. Her friends saw it on the morning news. Within 3 hours, every major news outlet in Las Vegas had run the story. Within 12, it was national. The wealthy philanthropist, the corrupt businessman, their empire built on the theft of pennies from people like Mia Morales. The courthouse was crowded on sentencing day, 6 weeks later. The gallery was packed with journalists, social workers, victims of abuse who had come to watch justice materialize in slow motion. Mia sat beside Nicholas, her hand resting on his arm, and she wore a blue dress that fit her properly, a gift from him, though he had never told her the cost. She no longer looked like a woman drowning. She looked like a woman learning to breathe. Hale came first, shuffling in shackles, his hair grown out, his face hollow. He had lost 30 pounds in 6 weeks. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had finally understood the reality of consequences. The judge looked at him across the bench, her expression absolute and immovable as stone. Douglas Hale, the crimes you have committed against the vulnerable, against children placed in your care, are among the most egregious this court has encountered. You abused your position. You stole from those who had nothing. You caused trauma to a child that will echo through her entire life. She paused, letting silence settle like a weight. I sentence you to 40 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. Hale's face went white. His knees buckled. He sank into his chair, and the sound that came from him was not quite a scream, not quite a sob, something in between, the sound of a man watching his own future collapse. Diana Whitfield stood when her name was called. She wore a black dress, her hair perfect, her expression defiant until the very last moment. She believed, even now, that her money, her connections, her carefully constructed image would save her. The judge was unmoved. Diana Whitfield, you have betrayed the trust placed in you as a custodian of charitable funds intended to help children. You embezzled over $2 million while children slept in shelters. You conspired to frame an innocent woman to cover your crimes. Your actions were calculated, cruel, and contemptible. The judge looked directly at her, and her voice never wavered. I sentence you to 40 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. For the first time, Diana's composure shattered. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. The marshal took her arm, and she was led from the courtroom, her expensive dress trailing behind her like a flag surrendering. Mia's hand tightened on Nicholas's arm. She was trembling, but not from fear. From something else, a release, a breaking of chains she had carried so long she had stopped noticing their weight. In the hallway outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, but Nicholas's men formed a wall around them. As they walked toward the exit, the afternoon light flooded through the glass doors, warm and gold and full of possibility. Emma was waiting in the car, and when Mia opened the door, the child launched herself into her arms, chattering about the ice cream shop she wanted to visit, about the new room that had been painted yellow, about the bedtime stories that Nicholas had started reading, his voice soft and careful and full of love. And Mia held her, this small girl who had survived, who had taught her that invisible people could become seen, that the deepest darkness could be pierced by a single act of kindness. 2 months had passed since the courtroom doors closed behind Diana Whitfield for the final time, and the October sun hung low and heavy over Las Vegas, casting long shadows across the mansion's manicured grounds. Mia Morales stood in Emma's bedroom, helping the girl choose between 2 uniforms for her first day of private school, and her hands moved with a steadiness that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The child's room was painted a soft cream color now, no longer institutional, and drawings covered one wall, crayon sketches of houses and families and sky so blue it looked like hope. Emma held up a navy blazer with uncertainty written across her small face. What if the kids don't like me? The question hung in the air between them, and Mia knelt down, her eyes meeting the girl's. They will love you, sweetheart. Because you are brave and kind, and those are the things that matter most. Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly, and she nodded, trusting this woman who had become her world. Downstairs, the black Mercedes sat idling in the circular drive. Nicholas Calabrese stood beside it in dark grey slacks and a white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his jaw set with the particular tension of a man who had learned to disguise vulnerability as focus. When Mia and Emma emerged from the mansion, his eyes found them immediately, and something in his expression softened, a crack in the fortress that had held for so long. He opened the rear door for them, his movements deliberate and slow, and Emma climbed in, swinging her small legs while Mia settled beside her, smoothing the girl's hair. The leather seat smelled like expensive leather, and the air conditioning hissed softly as Nicholas pulled onto the palm-lined street leading away from the mansion. In the rearview mirror, his dark eyes held Mia's for a moment longer than necessary, and something wordless passed between them, acknowledgement, gratitude, and underneath it all, something neither had yet spoken aloud. The drive to Westbrook Academy took 20 minutes through the glittering heart of the city. Emma pressed her face to the window, watching the world blur past, her fingers twisted together in her lap. When they pulled through the black iron gates of the school, the gardens erupted in color, flowering bushes and manicured lawns where other children already played. Emma's breathing quickened. Nicholas pulled into the circular drive and parked, and the silence that followed felt weighted with significance. "Ready?" he asked, turning to look at his daughter. Emma shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again. Mia reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'll walk you to the classroom," she said softly. Nicholas stepped out and opened both doors, and the three of them made their way toward the main entrance, a peculiar family held together by circumstance and something far deeper than blood. A teacher named Mrs. Cheng greeted them at the classroom door, her smile warm and practiced. She took Emma's hand gently, and the girl looked back once, twice, 3 times as she was led inside. At the threshold, she turned and waved, her small hand moving in slow arcs. Mia waved back, and Nicholas raised his hand in a gesture that was almost ceremonial in its gravity. When Emma disappeared around the corner, Mia released a breath she had not known she was holding. They walked back to the car in silence, and Nicholas opened the passenger door this time, gesturing for her to sit in the front. The gesture itself felt significant. She was no longer the caretaker in the back seat, but something else entirely. The drive back to the mansion took a different route. Nicholas turned away from the main streets and wound through quieter neighborhoods where oak trees lined the boulevards and older homes sat behind wrought iron fences. He did not turn on the radio. The only sound was the soft hum of the engine and the occasional whisper of tires on asphalt. When they pulled into the mansion's drive, he parked but did not turn off the engine. His hands remained on the steering wheel, and Mia watched the side of his face, waiting. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, his voice like thunder rumbling in the distance. "These past 2 months, watching you with Emma, watching you heal, watching you become part of this house." He paused, and when he turned to face her, his dark eyes held something raw and unguarded. "I cannot imagine this house without you. I cannot imagine my life without you." Mia's breath caught in her chest. She had felt it building between them for weeks now, the way his hand lingered when he passed her a cup of coffee, the way his eyes followed her across a room, the way he had rearranged his entire empire to be home by 6 o'clock every evening to read Emma bedtime stories. But hearing it spoken aloud felt different, dangerous, like stepping off a cliff not knowing if there was ground below. "Nicholas, I am still just a caretaker," she began, but he shook his head, cutting her off with a gesture that was gentle but firm. "You are the woman who saved my daughter when nobody else would protect her. You are the woman who walked into a mansion with $34 to her name and changed everything. You are the woman I am falling in love with, Mia." He reached across the console and took her hand, and his palm was warm and solid against hers. She was trembling, though she could not say why. Perhaps because falling in love felt like the most dangerous thing she had ever done. Perhaps because she had learned long ago that good things did not happen to her, that happiness was something other people experienced in television shows and magazine pages. Perhaps because she was terrified that this, all of this, would vanish like smoke. "I am falling too," she whispered. "But I am scared." "Of what?" His thumb moved across her hand in slow, deliberate circles. "That I will wake up and this will disappear. That I will be back in that cold apartment, counting pennies, wondering if any of this was real." The words came out broken and small, like a child's confession. "That I will hurt Emma by being here and then leaving." Nicholas turned fully in his seat to face her, and he reached up with his free hand to cup her face, his fingers gentle against her cheekbone. "Look at me," he said, and she did, drowning in the dark of his eyes. "You are not going back. Not to that apartment, not to that life, not ever. You are home now. You are both home now." He kissed her then, and it was not urgent or frantic. It was slow and deliberate, like a promise being made in the most ancient language. Like a man soothing a wounded animal back to trust. When he pulled away, Mia's eyes remained closed for a moment longer, as if opening them would break the spell. The engine ticked as it cooled. In the mansion behind them, staff moved about their duties, oblivious to the moment that was shifting everything. That evening, Emma sat between them in Nicholas's study, her legs swinging from a leather chair as a therapist, Dr. Reeves, a woman with kind eyes and a notebook, asked her gentle questions about her feelings and her dreams. Nicholas had insisted on trauma counseling immediately after Diana's sentencing, understanding in the bone-deep way of a man who had survived his own childhood that healing required guidance. Emma spoke haltingly about the shelter, about Mia, about the house. When Dr. Reeves asked if she felt safe now, Emma nodded without hesitation. "Miss Mia keeps me safe," she said simply. "And Daddy keeps us both safe." After Emma had been excused to the kitchen for a snack, Dr. Reeves closed her notebook and looked at Nicholas across the desk. "Your daughter is showing remarkable resilience," she said. "But she needs consistency. She needs to know that the people in her life will remain stable, that their presence is permanent, not temporary." "She has both consistency and permanence," Nicholas said, and outside the study door, Mia waited in the hallway, her heart expanding at the certainty in his voice. "She has us. She has both of us." The doctor smiled, and there was something knowing in her expression. "She speaks about Miss Mia the way children speak about their mothers, Mr. Calabrese. The way she describes safety and home and unconditional love. You may want to think about what that means for your family's future." 3 days later, Nicholas arranged a meeting with a financial advisor in his private office. Mia was called in, confused, uncertain what this required. He handed her a bank statement printed on heavy cream-colored paper. The numbers made no sense at first. Her mother's medical debt, the amount that had hung over her head like a guillotine for so long, paid in full. The foreclosure notice on her old apartment, cancelled. The property itself, now deeded in her name, purchased outright, free and clear. And below that, another line item. College fund. $50,000. Mia's hand shook so violently she nearly dropped the paper. Tears came without warning, flooding down her face as she tried to form words that would not come. "This is too much," she finally managed. "Nicholas, this is impossible." He stood and walked around the desk, pulling her into his chest with the kind of certainty that suggested he had been waiting for permission. "It is not enough," he said into her hair. "It will never be enough for what you did. You saved my daughter's life. You gave her back to me. There is no price for that." But what Mia did not know was that Nicholas had prepared one more surprise, and it would change everything again. That evening, the three of them gathered in the formal dining room, Emma still wearing her school uniform, her cheeks flushed with excitement over the details of her first day. Nicholas waited until the plates had been cleared and Emma's glass of milk sat half empty before he excused the housekeeping staff, something he rarely did. The mansion fell quiet around them, the kind of quiet that felt deliberate and full of waiting. Nicholas stood, and Emma's eyes followed him with the curiosity of a child sensing that something significant was about to unfold. He lowered himself onto one knee before them, and Mia's breath stopped entirely. But there was no ring in his hand, no small velvet box. Instead, he looked between Mia and his daughter, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every lesson he had learned about what truly mattered in this life. "Emma and I have been talking about something very important," he said, and the girl's mouth fell open with anticipation. "And we came to a decision that we needed to ask you. We want you to be part of our family," he continued, his dark eyes fixed on Mia. "Officially. Not as a caretaker. As my mom," Emma shouted, jumping from her chair with such force it clattered backward. "Will you be my mom? Please, please, please?" Mia made a sound that was not quite a word, and she dropped to her knees, pulling Emma against her chest as the girl's small arms wrapped around her neck. The child was laughing and crying simultaneously, and Nicholas wrapped his arms around both of them, and for the first time in his life, the most powerful man in Las Vegas allowed tears to fall freely, without shame, without apology. "There is no rush," he said into Mia's hair, his voice rough. "No pressure. But when you are ready, we will be here. Both of us. For as long as you want us." Mia pulled back just enough to look at his face, at Emma's face, at this impossible miracle that had bloomed from the darkest soil. "I am ready," she whispered. "I have been ready since I walked through those gates with nothing but $34 and a child's shoes." That night, after Emma had been tucked beneath her new blankets in her room painted the color of hope, Nicholas read to her from a picture book about a lighthouse that guided lost ships to safety. Emma's eyes grew heavy, and she yawned so wide her jaw cracked, and she turned toward Mia, who sat on the opposite side of the bed. The girl's small hand reached out and grasped Mia's fingers. "My head does not hurt anymore," she murmured, her eyes already closing. "It has not hurt for a long time." Mia's eyes met Nicholas's across the sleeping child, and he reached over and placed his palm against Emma's small chest, feeling it rise and fall with the steady breath of a girl finally at peace. Outside, the October night pressed against the windows, but inside this room, there was nothing but warmth and the knowledge that some families are not born, they are built, piece by piece, from courage and second chances and the refusal to believe that anyone is beyond saving. 6 months later, spring had transformed the mansion grounds into something that looked like a painting. Flowers bloomed in every color imaginable, and the air smelled like possibility and new growth. Emma's 7th birthday party unfolded across the gardens like a celebration of survival itself. Children ran through the grass, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze, and Emma wore a purple dress with a crown of flowers twisted through her hair. When she spotted Mia standing near the refreshment table, she ran without hesitation, launching herself into her arms with the unself-conscious joy that only a child can manage. "Best birthday ever, Mom!" Emma squealed, and the word, "Mom," landed in Mia's chest like a thunderbolt. Her eyes filled with tears, and she held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair and the reality of this moment. Across the garden, Nicholas stood with Tony and Nino, watching his family with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "Never thought I would see the day, boss," Tony said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Neither did I," Nicholas replied. "But here we are." The transformation was complete and visible to anyone who looked. Mia now worked part-time at the city shelter by choice, advocating for children in the system, her efforts funded by a foundation Nicholas had established in Emma's name. She was finishing her degree in social work, her textbook stacked on the study desk alongside Nicholas's own work. Douglas Hale was serving his 40-year sentence without possibility of parole. Diana Whitfield's appeals had been denied, and she had faded from the city's consciousness like a curse lifted. Emma's bruises had healed completely. Her nightmares had stopped months ago. She was thriving in school, in therapy, in life. That night, after the last guest had departed and Emma slept deeply upstairs, Mia and Nicholas sat on the balcony overlooking the transformed gardens. The spring air carried warmth, and the sky had cleared after an afternoon rain, leaving everything wet and gleaming. Mia leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close with the kind of possessiveness that was gentle but absolute. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real," she said softly. "It is real," Nicholas replied. "You made it real. You walked through those gates with nothing but $34 and a pair of baby shoes, and you changed everything. We changed each other, Mia whispered. Yes, he said. We did. They sat in comfortable silence, and Mia's voice came again, barely audible above the sound of the night insects. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes they do, he agreed. The camera pans back and up, pulling away from the balcony to show the mansion bathed in golden light, three figures silhouetted against the night sky, a family built from broken pieces, now whole and unbreakable. And the message is clear: courage is not the absence of fear, but loving someone enough to fight through it. Protection is not about power or money, it is about showing up when it matters most. And sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. If this story moved your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who desperately needs hope today. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because tomorrow we have another story that will break your heart and rebuild it with something more beautiful. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever taken a risk to protect someone you love? We read every comment, and the best ones will be featured in tomorrow's video. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Thank you for believing in Mia and Nicholas and Emma. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Remember, no matter how hard life gets, after the rain, the sky clears. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.